We are back. I'm joined with Pastors Jesse Caniff-Kuhn and Meredith Keesley. Jesse, I think you're just right down the street from me.
Yeah.
And Meredith is up in Metro Washington, D.C. And I'm delighted that you can join and be part of this today, and just share with the assembled group some things. Meredith, I think you are the one that I have worked with the longest on annual stewardship of any of my clients. And Jesse, outside of middle school Sunday school when we met, we worked together when you were pretty fresh in your first call. And I remember paternity leave interrupted the stewardship drive. And so I hope that at least makes part of what we talk about today. Meredith, if we can start with you, that would be fantastic. And if you just want to set the stage for folks on where you're at, kind of what we've done together, and just go.
Sure. So I am Meredith Keesley. I'm the senior pastor at Abiding Presence Lutheran Church in Burke, Virginia. Next month, I will celebrate my 11th anniversary with them, serving as their pastor, and have been ordained for 15 years now. I just passed that mark earlier this month. And Mike and I have been working together on stewardship since 2016. And I have to confess that I really, really don't like stewardship. In fact, every October when stewardship season comes around, I warn the staff, I warn my family, this is the time of the year I am the most cranky because stewardship makes me nuts. And yet, the way that we got started working with Mike back for our fall stewardship campaign in 2016 is we had been kind of steadily growing the budget, increasing really nominal, $20,000 this year, $30,000 this year. And we were ready to bring on an associate pastor. And that was going to be a $100,000 jump to our budget. And my folks looked around the table with me and said, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. So we need to do something different. And it was at that time that I got connected to Mike through our Synod. And Mike came on board with us. And in the first year of our participation in Stewardship for All Seasons, we set a goal of $100,000 in new income. We hit $80,000 in new income plus a grant. And for the first time in my ministry, I got thank you notes from parishioners about the stewardship campaign. And I was like, seriously? But people actually wrote me thank you notes for having this stewardship campaign, for inviting them into this generosity journey. I heard from folks who said to me, look, I don't believe in making commitments, but you've changed my mind on that. And it was really this rich experience that changed not only the congregation's way of looking at it, but I would say in the course of my ministry, probably one of the most personally impactful things to my faith journey as a follower of Jesus. This idea that, I always had in my head that if I was tithing, I could check the box and I was done. And Mike told me, no, it's a journey. And then he told me stories about people who were giving away 30% of their income. I was like, no, I thought we just had to check this box. And so Mike really changed that for me personally. He helped me change that mindset in the congregation. And since when Mike walked in the door at 2016, we had a $60,000 a year budget, and we just passed a $932,000 a year budget. So about a 35% increase in growth in member giving, in involvement, and in a sense of what it means to be the church for the sake of the world.
Yeah, thanks. And you're in a community that transitions a lot.
We are. These are so not only are we in a community that transitions a lot, we have a lot of military families. We are a young congregation, so we have a ton of kids and little people and families. We are not a church that operates on a few large donors. So my first call was in a church where, you had those top 5 givers who gave a significant part of the budget. And if you had a project that wanted to be done, you knew who to call. In the congregation I serve, we now are a church that really is an across the board. It takes every gift, no matter how big or how small, to make that happen.
Yeah, I describe your sanctuary as the noisiest place I've ever worshiped, but it was certainly joyful.
That sums us up.
That was great. Thanks. Jesse, you want to set the stage for where we started with stewardship?
Yeah, sure. So I started my first call in the fall of 2017 at a church in Greensboro. And then I started working with Mike in the spring of 2018. And so this was a smaller congregation. It's the Lutheran Church of Our Father, and I served there until December when I've now switched calls, and I'm in South Carolina doing Lutheran campus ministry at Gamecock Lutheran. But at Our Father is where I worked with Mike, and I was fresh out of seminary. I was called to be there, and I was told that finances were always tight and always a little under. And, it felt like there was kind of a scarcity mindset. And I was like, oh, like I'm coming from seminary. I'm like, I'm going to talk about abundance. I'm going to teach all these people like about how there's enough and all these things. And then I was surprised and kind of disappointed at how quickly I was captivated by a scarcity mindset to kind of get into my first congregation and look at the numbers and look at the budget and look at things and kind of be like, oh, wait, actually, there kind of isn't enough. And like, oh, actually, this is. So then getting to work with Mike was really helpful because he said all the things he's been saying already today and kind of reassured this call to abundance and also gave some ways of doing that. And so the stewardship team was the first time that I recruited people by, instead of saying like, it's not a big deal, it won't be very hard, it won't be very much work, like I'd kind of already fallen into. Stewardship was the first place where I said, this matters a lot, it's going to take time, we're going to have to work on it, but I think it's important, and I think it's going to be life-giving for us and for our congregation. And so even just that was kind of the first fruits that I saw of just putting the right people in place and people who wanted to work and were willing to work and believed in what we were doing. And we set some pretty big goals that first year too. We were trying to dream up more ministry initiatives. And I was talking to Mike, like, yeah, but like, first I got to balance the budget, right? Because we're always running at a deficit. And so we talked about ways of doing both, right? Of making sure that our current ministries are fully funded, but also we could dream and grow and do more things. And so the finance and even stewardship people I was working with thought it was kind of crazy because they're like, we're operating at a $20,000 deficit and you're trying to add $10,000 to our operating budget. But we went for it. And so we have about 50 giving units. In that first year, we went from 133,000 of pledged giving before working together. And then that first year we jumped to 174,000. So about $40,000. So we covered that deficit. We did the 10,000 of new stuff we want to do, and then still said, oh, look, we can add more things into the budget now. And that first boost was kind of that was a big part of the culture change for us, was seeing like, oh, these things aren't just a theory. This works and it's true and is really just coming from our existing community. That what we needed was always here. We just needed to approach things in ways that were meaningful and helpful. So, and yes, we had to change our timeline because my wife was pregnant with our second son. And so we launched the stewardship campaign the Sunday before my son was born. And then I went on paternity leave and had 2 weeks of like not knowing what happened and if the returns were what we wanted and if people were really doing it. And so that was kind of my, I don't know, I'm sure there's some good biblical metaphor for that time. I was like wrestling with the doubt and like, oh no, like I told everybody it was going to work and now it's not going to work. And then I got back and found out, no, that the work we had done had been well received, and also that God's movement was still moving.
Yeah, and I think it also helped assure that your leaders had to lead and not just make this your job to talk about, which I think long term, and now that you've left, hopefully leaves them in better position, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The first year especially, I was pretty hands-on and
Mm-hmm.
kind of control freak about some of the stuff, and would be like, let me write that, let me do this, let me do this, because I really wanted to make sure it happened a certain way. But then we got to the end and it was like they had to do the final pitch, and they had to be
Mm-hmm.
the ones to follow up on Sunday and say, our first Sunday we saw this, we're
Mm-hmm.
still hoping to see this. And then I think we just kind of built on that over the next couple of years, to where I hope that really it's more of a culture thing than a me
Mm-hmm.
thing there
Right.
now.
Right. Good. Good. Thanks. I've got a few more things for you, Jesse, but we'll come back in a second. Meredith, this morning I talked about outcome stories and telling the story, and I think you do that as well or better than anyone I've seen. Can you talk about the telling of stories in your context
Sure.
and how you do that?
Thanks for
And
that.
if you and if you forget how you do that, I can remind you. But
Great. So we do tell stories, and we tell them primarily, I think, as like Mike was saying, right, as a witness to the gospel, not as a way to get people to give us money. And
mm-hmm.
that was a really good shift for us. So we put together an annual book. The doubles kind of both as our stewardship campaign book and our annual report that invites people to share their stories with us. So this year it had the stories of 2 or 3 families who had started worshiping with us for the first time over the pandemic when we're on live stream. It had the story of a family who really hadn't been very involved pre-pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly they were the ones who kept posting on our social media like, hey, did you hear that the church needs more peanut butter for the food pantry? And I suddenly realized that this family, like, they were doing it, and I was like,
Mm.
whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
And so I was able to invite them and be like, hey, I'd love for you to share this story of how you transitioned into this place of really being leaders in this church. And she wrote this beautiful paragraph about what it meant for her family. We've done some of the videos, which have been successful. It's always great when folks can share their own story, but a lot of it too is in preaching. I
Mm.
have found that it just has become the rhythm of how I preach, to tell the congregation the stories that they might not get to see. And that's
Mm-hmm.
especially happened in the midst of the pandemic, right? Where I kind
Mm-hmm.
of get this firsthand glance of everything that's going on. And rarely is that translating, just because we are still in a live stream worship only way. Our
Mm-hmm.
facility is closed. And so preaching is really the place where I can get the most stories across of, hey, folks, let me tell you what I heard from our food team about what happened at the pantry this Sunday when this family drove up. And just continually kind of taking the gospel and hearing what God's story is and figuring out where our church's story is
Mm-hmm.
fitting in with that too.
Yeah. Good. Good. Thanks. Yeah, your stewardship book is one of my favorite outcome story examples. So we'll keep doing that. Hey, Jesse, you've taken a new call since your first one here to campus ministry. What are you envisioning? What you started to put in place in that first call translates now to this one? And if you need help with that, I can give it to you too. But I think. Well, anyway, I'll let you talk first, and then I'll see if.
No pressure. It's like, there's a right answer. We'll see if I find it.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, certainly just the work we did together equipped me with the skills and confidence to step into this new thing. Finances. So Gamecock Lutheran is not housed in any one congregation. So our budget isn't supported by one congregation, and we need to find funding in lots of other ways. And there's a lot of generous support already through the Synod and congregations and individuals. But as I've kind of come here and looked around, it seems that we've not asked for money in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that asking is one of the big things I learned working together, that so often our stewardship drives are, okay, here's a bit of theology, here's a bit of budget, here's a pledge card, write a number on it, please, and turn it in. And instead, it's okay to ask. And it's actually better leadership and caretaking and stewardship to ask, and to ask specifically, and to say, hey, I know that you've been doing this, and thank you so much. If you're able to give this much next year, that would equip us to be able to do these things that we all really want to see happen. And so for me, right now, I'm thinking about kind of identifying people who care about this ministry in some way, whether that's alumni or congregations or pastors or people who've been connected in some way. Anyone at the cross section of Gamecock and Lutheran, and to say, I think that what we're doing here is meaningful for the students on campus, and also for the wider cloud of witnesses of this ministry. And so I'd like to be intentional about sharing that story with you and making you part of hearing what's happening here, and also hope that you'll want to help support us and let it thrive and be all that we know that can happen here.
No, you got that. I knew you would. In the congregation setting, identifying who we're going to ask is easy. It's the people who keep showing up that are on our donor records. Your task is a little hard, but you nailed it. You'll identify anybody that intersects between Gamecock and Lutheran, and then inform, motivate, ask, and thank them, and build the case as to what difference it makes in the students' lives. So, and we did talk as you were discerning campus ministry, but so I knew you had it. But that's exactly right. Thinking back though to Greensboro, there's some auxiliary kind of support things for stewardship, like how a council leads, having a plan and goals, and what of any of that you still remember? Jesse, I remember you as the student who actually did the homework. Like we would talk about these things, and like you'd come back and tell me, well, we started doing this at council meetings. Like any of those things that kind of help with that creation of culture that you were looking for, that stand out to you. And again,
yeah,
I'm prepared to help you with this if you need me to. But
I think I got this one. So
okay.
So one of the things we talked about was like council development, and thinking about the difference between council as a group of managers and as a board of directors, and how we can kind of shape our council to operate in a way that's doing big picture overview stuff and not the details. And so we were trying to work on that some, and Mike had this idea that he said, like, I always thought it'd be fun or good or helpful if a council, when they met, would start by standing up around the table and sharing where they've experienced God at work in the midst of this congregation in the last month since we met. And so we tried it, and I was like, okay, this feels kind of weird and hokey, but like, can everyone please stay standing up? And we're gonna talk for a little bit. I like lit a candle. I was like, okay, so, and it was weird that first time we did it, and I kind of had to lead a lot, and I'm like, that these are the kind of things I'm talking about. Like, these are things that I have seen, and people would have little things, and a lot of like something about worship or something about serving in the food pantry that are really good and meaningful, but also like the low-hanging fruit of that question. But as we did that month after month after month, one, people came to the table and were standing up, and two, people were the types of God movements that people were noticing became smaller but bigger and more profound, right? And that it was the little moments or interactions that someone had with someone they hadn't really known at the church before, or something that happened at a supermarket, or just all sorts of things. And that became kind of the grounding of the why are we together, that before we jump into, okay, here's all the reports, it was, God is alive and God is moving, in and around us. And that's actually what we're coming to think about and be led by in this time together. So So yeah, that was a big change that we started to feel in those rhythms.
And I think that's huge. And the reason for the standing up is because it teaches people not to, just figure they're sitting back to be a board member now, but you're on alert that it's something special. But the side version of what you gave them, not only building a good culture for seeking gifts when the stewardship drive comes around, you gave them a story to tell and to share with their neighbors, their friends, their, coworkers, that if all we tell people is that the altar guild still needs help, that's not the story we're going to share, but you helped equip with the story. And I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but I've appreciated your tenacity to work through that original awkwardness to get there to where it became what you did, and you gave them the story to tell. So I appreciate that. Meredith, here's one I feel you're equipped for, but I can probably help you. Have members ever surprised you with their generosity?
Yeah. Actually, I haven't even told you this story yet. So
Okay.
I channeled my inner Mike Ward at our annual meeting, right? And I was doing my whole spiel about where we've been and where we're going. And I stopped in the middle and I said, look, folks, here's the deal. We have the vision, we have the people. Let me be honest with you right now. The biggest stumbling block is money. And it's going to take some initial significant gifts I presented these two visions to get them going. My phone rang Monday morning, and it was someone who said, hey, tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then last night, I got a text message of, hey, can you call me when you get a chance? It's not urgent. And pastors always get those texts, and we're like, oh, this can't be good, right? So I called right away, and they're like, hey, we are so excited. We got an unexpected bonus from work, and we are designating $5,000 of that to the food ministry. So, and here's what's so cool about it. Because they've been part of this culture of generosity, they then said to me, but can we think about how not just to give this gift, but how to inspire others to give it too?
Nice.
So can we do it as a matching gift?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, was Mike Ward talking to you too? Right? But it was almost as if, one, I was blown away by their joy in being able to make that phone call. And they kept thanking me for the opportunity to make this gift. I'm like, no, I'm thanking you.
Yeah.
But they had caught on to this generosity culture, right? That we've been talking about, that we've been building up as a congregation. So when they were suddenly in a position to be generous, they were like, wait a minute, maybe we can use this to help others come on board too. So, there's several other stories like that as well, but that's just this past week. So yeah.
And the infrastructure is there for those types of gifts to come because they've been hearing the outcome. They've heard the vision. They know that you're going to be able to use that money well. You're not going to hide it in a savings account and it will never come out again, And so that's where it's all working together to create that environment. And look at you telling people they need to give their money. That's awesome. So, real quick before we kind of start to summarize and parting comments, Meredith, I remember last year the law changed and distributions from an IRA were no longer required for the year, but they were still allowed. I think you saw still a trend for generosity in that. Can you just share with people about that?
Yeah, I didn't know what RMD stood for even like 3 years ago, maybe. And Mike put it in my head, hey, have you heard about this? And so we started saying to the congregation, when the initial tax law changes came out, your required minimum distribution can come directly to us. This past year, we saw about $125,000 come in through RMDs in a year when they didn't have to take them. And here's what's amazing about RMD gifts for us is that oftentimes they exceed what the commitment was on the statement of intent. Because when folks go into those accounts, they realize what's in there and they make that. So we blew out of the water our projections and our members blew out of the water what they had committed in RMDs. in spite of this. So we started doing education like back before the pandemic. We had a senior lunch group, right? And we brought in a specialist
Mhm.
on RMDs to explain this to everyone as a way to encourage it.
Good, thanks. Again, I knew you could handle that one. So we're closing in on running out of time where the the program will automatically mute us and we're not allowed to say anything else. So Jesse, any final comments that you think the world needs to hear about stewardship, generosity, and all things we're talking about?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to make sure, I wrote down a list of things to make sure got said.
Okay.
Most of them you've covered in your time this morning already. One thing I'll say is when I was putting together a team to help me, my first impulse was to get money people because it's stewardship and we're talking about money. And I found that money people tend to lean a little more scarcity, or what they would probably call like realistic or realism. And what I needed on my stewardship, and that's great for the finance team and is a good counterbalance, but for my stewardship team, I needed dreamers and storytellers. And that recruiting those folks is what helped me most.
Great. Thanks. So that covered your list then?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. Meredith?
Yeah, I think simply to say to stick with it. I get, as I said at the onset of this, right? I get bogged down by stewardship. I get stressed out. I look at the numbers. It's really easy for me to fall into that scarcity mindset. It's also really easy to get discouraged because that is the time when I go through the roles and I'm like, wait a minute, those people are here every week and this is their commitment. But I also find in the midst of it that I become so inspired by my folks. And so hold tight to those moments of inspiration to push you through all the rest of it, and to remember that the Holy Spirit shows up in people who are never on our radar. And that's amazing.
Wow, that's fantastic. Y'all were great. I'm sure when the evaluations come on, you'll far exceed anything I've done alone. So thank you so much for joining today, for being who you are, and for sharing part of your story with the group to help inspire that this is something that can take place. So again, I appreciate you and delighted to have you on board with us.